I'm doing a test recording. Test button.
Tonight, my hash browns turn into my new $3 munchie mashup. Crispy hash browns, tasty white cheese, mashed up.
Killed that. Recording devices. We're checking this out. This is an audio test. We are testing the audio to see how it sounds with the current settings. This is an audio test. We are testing the audio to see how it sounds with the current settings. Well, we're getting ready here. come and chat with me live now over on Twitch. Hey y'all, come and there. That at least looks better. Just still getting things set up here. Anybody who gets into the thing later and watches the replay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's just setting things up. Mm. Hello, whoever's arrived. Just setting things up for a Kaiserreich episode. I haven't started recording it yet. Light cruisers, heavy cruisers. Let's go to Deutschland class battleship. carrier because they take a long time to produce and cost a lot of fuel to produce as well. I see, but I expected that now. Let's produce one more support equipment. Okay, that gets that going. This is just sort of standard. We're going to go through some economic harsh times. I know. So let's try to expand our economy. Okay, this change. Well, at least we don't have the National Socialist stuff that we're going. Okay. Well, 70 days versus 35 days. We're going to take the 35 days. Because I sort of know what's going to happen. Let's send these guys to here. Alright. That's sort of looking good. I think we have that down. Okay. Welcome, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with a new start of Kaiserreich. This is the new improved version. They've expanded the national focus trees and other elements for many other nations, Siam, Middle Africa, Goring's domain down here. Got a lot of that improved. I've been a little frustrated, quite honestly, with the two mods that I've been wanting to play, both Black Ice and Kaiserreich, because they were both having little problems and almost ready to release a new version, and now they've done so. Well, Kaiserreich has, so that's what we're going to be playing here. So, hope you'll want to come along with me. We're going to explore deeper. Okay, profits from legation cities. Following the 1926 intervention in China and the Treaty of Nanjing signed in November of that year, foreign trade was left to the richest cities of the coast under a joint control of world powers owning interest in China. The independence of these consortium of cities was guaranteed by 10 powers: Australasia, Austria, Canada, Flanders, Wallonia. That's interesting for Brussels or Belgium. Germany, Italy, Japan, National France, Russia, and USA. Foreign investments and legation cities themselves flourish not only through foreign trade, but also thanks to smuggling into the Ost-Asian and Qing territories. Despite the ongoing economic crisis, our investment in legation cities are still bringing us grand profits. Okay. the constitution of the Kaiser, or the German Kaiserreich. After the crushing defeat of the Second French Empire by forces of the North German Federation, our constitution was signed in 1871 by representatives of the North German Federation and the 4 southern German states. This constitution put the southern German states under the influence of the Northern German Federation, thus giving the enlarged entity a new identity as the Deutsches Reich. According to the constitution, the empire was a federation of 25 German states. The Präsidentum, sorry, I'm butchering this German, I know. The emperor was held by the King of Prussia, who had the title of German Emperor. German Emperor appointed the Chancellor, the head of the German government, the chairman of the Bundesrat, Council of Representatives of the German states. Laws were enacted by the Bundesrat and the Bundestag, Imperial Diet, elected by male Germans above the age of 25. However, excuse me, it is the Emperor, not the Bundesrat or the Bundestag, who leads the power in the German Empire. With an option to dissolve the Reichstag on a whim, it is clear that the main political power in the German Empire rests not with the Reichstag elected by the people, but in the hands of the non-elected German Emperor. Another issue of the Prussian three-class voting system, which has remained unchanged since 1849, over 60 years after the founding of the Kaiserreich. The liberals and the Social Democrats are growing increasingly disgruntled with the status of things, and the Constitution may see large revisions in the next few years. Okay. For those of you who don't know, because we're calling this is called Kaiserreich. Kaiser is just the German corruption, as I would call it, of Caesar. Now that may be the English corruption of Cesare, I don't know. As in, named after the person's name, Gaius Julius Caesar. Not a title, but a name, where emperor is a changing, if you will, from the term imperator, which was a title. So the Russians changed it to Tsar, Germans to Kaiser, English to Caesar. So just to give you a little background, this is all, shall we say, because it had been the Kaiser of the Holy Roman Empire. Note the term Roman. That's where, going way back, Germany, or not Germany, Europe gets the legitimacy of empires from Rome. You have to, most modern people don't really understand this. Many of you do because you are history nerds like myself, but a lot of people don't understand the way government really sort of works traditionally, ongoing. You needed a form of legitimacy to be something other than a dictator. And a dictator also comes from Rome. They were generally there, a dictator for, generally speaking, for a year, or for a specific crisis. But a dictator lives or dies, often literally, on his success, his performing well. Where if you have other forms of legitimacy, you can go, oh, this was a mistake, or oh, this was bad times, or something bad happened to it. And the people will go, yeah, okay, you're at least partially human. This was something bad. will rally around you because you have a form of legitimacy in your government. So to get that legitimacy, you can go way back to kings and queens. And in European Christian context, that is something that is anointed by God. So you've gone through and gotten the church's blessing, though that starts falling apart more as you move away from Catholicism. But to be an emperor and to have an empire that is legitimate, and an empire really is a multi-national, multi-nation, maybe even multi-state, depending on how you look at it. Because a nation is like the German nation. The state, and I know to Americans they think of states, and a lot of people think of it as a province term, but a state is a government. So you can have the Tuscan state of, within the general region of Italy, but then you can have the Italian nation, all of the Italians. And so now, of course, you can have a nation state, a nation, or a state that takes up the complete nation of an ethnic group that's coherently of one, culture, viewpoint. Maybe not everybody of that culture is within it, but a great majority of that. So to have an empire and have it legitimized, these empires were in existence until 1918. Okay, you have to think about, obviously we're playing Kaiserreich here, so the empires continue in existence, but you have the Russian Empire with the Tsar is coming from Roman legitimacy via its east, the Roman Empire in the east, which sort of morphs into Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire. The Russians are taking that legitimacy and moving it, particularly once it's fallen to the Muslims, moving it to their empire. In Europe, coming out of oh boy, Charlemagne, and that's in English Charles the Great, is the first Holy Roman Emperor. They're trying to now put the stamp of Christianity on the Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Emperor, when it started, Empire, did have parts of Italy, but never had Rome. But did have, parts of Gaul, France, if you will, other parts of the Roman Empire. And that legitimacy that you see moves through the European context all the way until 1918. So this is something that is often overlooked in modern socialist education, and that I'm putting in, I believe, most of Europe and definitely in America today, that they dismiss or even just not even acknowledge its existence. And by doing that, they are purely looking at wanting to look at forms of government that doesn't have any form of legitimacy other than a claimed majority rule of democracy. And you hear people constantly today talk about protecting of democracy, and most of that comes out of World War II's propaganda, some of it a little bit of World War I, but democracy. And you have, if you will, to some degree, the three gods of, shall we say, of political thought in the West: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. That they, when you take a philosophy class, they still hold them up to be founding elements of European, Western, however you want to look at it, thought. And one thing that all three of them said very clearly was that democracy was the worst possible form of government they could conceive of. Okay? So people who set up our Western way of thinking thought democracy was the worst possible form of government that they could conceive of. And particularly, I know Plato did, and if you don't know this, Socrates, to the best of our knowledge, never wrote a single word. He was a talker, sort of like myself. Unfortunately, we can record my talking here. But Plato was his teacher. Some of the stuff we believe he faithfully took down of Socrates' dialogues and monologues. Basically, all of Plato's writing was, at least that which survives to us today, is in Socrates' mouth. They put him in his words, whether we believe a bunch of it was written after his death. But he is definitely a student of Socrates. And basically a student of Plato is Aristotle. So sort of three generations there that create Western thought. Now, I once said to someone who thought of himself as fairly educated, but still going through the education process, still a student, that these three people thought that the worst possible form of government. He says, but they would have no other government. I go, no. They hated democracy. They think democracy is the worst possible form of government, to the point that a democracy voted to put Socrates to death. Okay, they voted in Athens Parliament to put Socrates to death for corrupting the youth. That was the charge, because he was corrupting the youth. Now, and you can look at read the trial of Socrates and other documents that survive to this day. Now, and Socrates really didn't talk about forms of government, but he talked about philosophies of the government, shall we say, where Plato and Aristotle, they talked about forms of government. And particularly Aristotle thought that representation within the government was part of the fundamentally best form of government you could have. And so representation is something often done through voting, but that is different than a democracy. I know I started Kaiserreich here, and I've gotten into this. Hello, Django. How you doing? No, not in America. In America, they are pushing majority rule. They are discrediting the American founders. They are trying to discredit the Constitution as, 3/5 of a human black people were, so it's a racist, white supremacist document that must go. No. They are trying to do majority rules for demagoguery to rule. That is the current move within the United States, and the fundamental difference between, say, a republic or some other form of government and a democracy is that within a republic it has laws, and the laws which not only govern the people but also govern the government, that limit governmental power, and these which really transformed with the Roman Republic was under the Roman Republic they had to post the laws basically on like clay or stone tablets on the side of the building so everybody could read it. And now this worked very effective when Rome was primarily Rome, the city, and parts of the Italian peninsula. Once it becomes an empire, we can see all the mad emperors and everything else. But while it was a republic with a constitution, with a limiting form of government, that Plato wanted government by the elites, that he thought he could somehow divine men's souls, that metaphorically would either have, the guys at the top would have the souls of gold, not that he thought they were real gold in their souls, but just those were the types, somehow to figure out who those people were, and the actual sort of doers of the government, particularly the military, would be the souls of silver, and then sort of everybody else in his republic. And it was a republic because you might very well have different elements to choose who is the best leader, and that type of thing, but that was only amongst those souls of gold. The souls of clay or whoever wouldn't have any sort of democratic say within Plato's ideal republic, where Aristotle believed in a mixed form of government, which could have a monarch, but generally was an aristocracy. That was a defined thing that also had a democratic representation within it of the groups of people within society. They often looked at them as tribes, which may very literally be tribes within the Greek community, or they could be sort of like what we would call them estates. Could be like the manufacturing estate, the farming estate, the shipping estate. If you're looking at classical Greek world type things, so that each of these groups would elect representatives. So the farmers would elect a group of representatives, the manufacturers would elect a group of representatives, and that type of thing. And that would give, these group of people. Now, I'm sure today, if we were to start talking about these three gentlemen, people would call them out as being racist because they held slaves. They believed in slavery. I don't know how fundamental, particularly, all three of them believed in slavery, but they lived within a world of slavery. Now, of course, the reason they think they were slaves is, to an American, a slave is a person who has black skin and is from Africa, where traditionally within the world history, and still to this day, because some people believe there is more slavery going on now of various types than there was before the American Civil War within America. Not within the whole world, but within America, there's more slavery going on today. But slavery was not traditionally not based on your ethnicity, was not traditionally black Africans. They were traditionally defeated enemies, or sort of an underclass that developed. So it wasn't racially based. because one city, one Gaulish city, could defeat another Gaulish city and take a bunch of the defeated people as slaves. It wasn't necessarily going long distances to some foreign cultural land to take slaves. It could just simply be people one valley over that would become slaves. And like the classic, the Helots of Sparta, to the best of my knowledge, they were basically all ethnically Greek. They just weren't the Spartan ruling elite. Okay, so this gets back, bringing it back now, is to legitimacy in government. If you are a dictator, your legitimacy rests solely on your ability to perform. If, like the assassination of President Kerensky, if you're not doing well in your government, you are no longer legitimate. If you're democratic, your legitimacy is based upon the majority, even if, yes, it's democratic representation within a constitutional form. It's still basing it on support of the majority, not being right, not being something else. Where with a Kaiser or a king, it is based on legitimacy of tradition over time, all coming out of Rome and before, mixed in with Christianity, the Holy Roman Empire. I think we've got a new subscriber. Good to see you there. Protic 666, I believe that was. And so that is your basing on legitimacy. Now, with Kerensky just being shot, and yes, I am bringing it back to the game. While on the way to the Senate, the assailant was taken down by the police, but the goals and the intentions of the attacker are unknown, despite his massive unpopularity amongst the Russian people due to his botched land reform and ineffective rule. Kerensky was nevertheless able to hold the country together for years, and his death has thrown Russia into chaos. The senators are already discussing a possible replacement to Kerensky. New coalitions are being formed both between the left and the right, while military men like Denenkin, who I think is okay considering things, Wrangel, who I'm a big fan of, and Kornilov, who I really don't know, they'll probably read about him when they're reading about the other men, are just one step away from intervening to dissolve democracy and save Mother Russia. Okay, so this gets back to this lecture on legitimacy in government. Let's use an example. The British monarchy. People believe that it's powerless now, and it may be. Depends on how you want to view it. But go back to 1940, 4 years after this time period, and you had a relatively, for Europe, stable form of government with a parliamentary monarchy within Britain. You have a collapse in both public as well as, I know I should be doing this black ice, but this is good enough here. Public confidence as well as in governmental confidence in the top leadership of the country in Britain. So Chamberlain, who very well may be a very good statesman, and I do believe he was, I don't know in detail, but a rather good prime minister of a peacetime Britain, not of a mobilizing for war Britain, but of a peacetime, let's keep things going. He was not a bad government leader, but he was not a war leader. And so their system by this time recognizes that probably the greatest expert on government is not the monarch, who just, whether you believe he's picked by God or you believe that he is, picked by birth, somebody who is bred from elites, or you just believe that, hey, it's random genes that get together. Maybe he's a little smarter, maybe he's a little dumber than average people, but he's been given a really good education, and monarchs can be given a really good education. But the idea is that they give this establishment of authority, of legitimacy, and so you have this crisis in government. Well, okay, what do? We're at war, France is falling, the monarch picks the new leader based upon likely candidates, who's going to do well, and it's sort of presented to him as being Churchill, and they accept. But I would believe George would have gone if Chamberlain picked somebody completely unsuitable, or if Parliament, whatever. He picks Churchill. Churchill steps in. With the assassination of Kerensky here is, you don't have a clear established line of authority in this crisis to move on with an assassination. You don't have a monarchical sort of system that goes, oh, well, the king's dead. Well, let's get his son, his daughter, his nephew, his somebody. Hello, Dimitra. Sorry, I'm butchering your name. You don't get, some family member to just step in to replace him that's a clear line of succession, because Kerensky, who of course is noted for coming out with the Menshevik government when overthrowing the Tsar, doesn't have a line of tradition, a clearly accepted constitution that, oh, the vice president, whoever it may be, if there is even a vice president in their form of government, which I don't believe is a real form of government, that they're supposing is one that they're making up, if there is not Der Metzel. Okay, that's easy. Now you break it up. Der Metzel. Der Metzel. Der Metzel. So you don't have a ongoing tradition. So you now have different power groups that are, because they talk about the right and the left here, you have a collapse in lines of succession. You have everyone trying to grab for it. That is a problem with either a dictator who is there, which he's sort of sounding like this, because he's successful, or with a democracy, but you don't have a clear cohesion of political thought. Is it going to be a communist, a syndicalist, or is it going to be a czarist, or something in between? And you don't have national consensus. So when you have these crises, and every nation will have them eventually. In the U.S., the last president who was shot was Ronald Reagan, and if it wasn't for modern medical abilities, he would have been dead. I mean, there's no question about this. So we're going to move on, try to get some playing in. And this is what I find is fascinating so far about Kaiserreich, because I played a little bit of, through 37 or something before. Is dealing with the ancient regimes, the ancient regimes of the world conflicting with the neo-regimes on something of an equal footing. The Commune of France, the Italian Federation, or I guess more the Socialist Republic of Italy. Okay. George the Fifth, last king of Great Britain and Ireland, who have ruled the home islands themselves, has passed while in exile in Canada. The first Windsor king, his reign shall be remembered with sorrow and sadness. During Britain lost both the Weltercraig and its homeland. The crown was inherited by Edward, Prince of Wales, now styling himself as Edward VIII. King Edward is a vengeful and ambitious man. not on good terms with Prime Minister Mackenzie King. He lives on the goal of avenging his father and reconquering the British Isles, thus quite popular among the British exiles in Canada. Okay, so that's setting up a Canadian attack on Britain. I wonder, does this mod have the ability to put a German king on the throne? Or king of, particularly the king of Bavaria? Because he was a legitimate claimant to the English throne, probably more legitimate than Edward. Okay, with the stagnation of our economy, the worsening conditions of our citizens during 1935, our government has decided that in order to restart our economic, we need additional cash only available through options of a mass sufficient. Okay, so we're going to get all of our money now for the year from that. Yeah, no, I'm not going exclusively to Twitch, but I want to build up my Twitch following base so that if things go really wrong, okay, see you when you get back, Django. I can continue on Twitch because Twitch is moving more and more into being able to do pre-recorded stuff. Yeah, I hope it's good connection for you. And I'm streaming it at hopefully good quality. Okay, Black Monday. On the 3rd of February 1936, the Berlin Stock Exchange stopped sinking. It plunged, fueled by the instability of the market panic. Selling erupted as soon as the stock market opened on Monday morning. It took well into the night for the teleprinters to stop spreading out the results of what became known as Black Monday. When the results had been analyzed, it was clear the situation had not only got worse, the shock of the unpleasant economic catastrophe will no doubt be felt over the entire world. The German Golden Age has ended for now, at least. Okay, so this is Black Monday. They're taking it from Black Friday in the United States. I know I've mentioned this a bit before. Black Friday happens because of sort of two joint events together, but two different factors. One, and I'll keep this much briefer than I did about the talk on legitimacy, they built a railroad down basically to Miami. Before that, 80–90% of the state of Florida lived up in this part of the state. This was there had been almost no connecting roads. It was just ports and little small towns down here. They moved, they put a railroad down, eventually bridges down to the Keys. And what the elites in America, particularly in and around New York City, but also Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, realized, oh, good, glad that it's been educational before, realized that they could get on a train and get down to Florida in the winter, because this was a time, before, heated cars. Well, a heated car was a train car or something, and only the people who could afford a train car could have their own car, and that wasn't getting them around the city. So the elites could move down to Miami during the winter. So this really started this going. Come to the 1920s, 1930s, and again, as I mentioned before, you can watch the movie Coconuts, starring the Marx Brothers, their first movie. For what it was, it's good. I'm a big Marx Brothers fan. So there was massive amounts of land speculation. 2 hurricanes hit, not quite like close succession as in hours or days, but just a few years apart. And one of them, I forget whether it was the first or the second one, a lot of people had never really been in an intense hurricane, and they hadn't really understood what a hurricane was. when hurricanes often come up to this part of the United States, they're often no longer hurricanes. They're now tropical storms, meaning they don't have an eye in the center of them. And even then, people don't really know. Now, when a hurricane is coming to you, it's slowly building up, because like a lot of these hurricanes that are recently been hitting the U.S. and the Caribbean in the last month or so, a lot of them, if you look at it, they're moving at like 7, 9 miles an hour across the land. Now, it's like 100 miles an hour of wind swirling around, but you can almost outrun it literally. You know, if you can run long enough, you can definitely outsail it in modern powered ships. But back then, they did not have a good early warning system. Well, looks like we have a new subscriber. Thank you, Dermetzel. Great. They didn't have early warning systems, but as to what hurricane, like days before, but you obviously have this building up, so people would take shelter in what they could, and a lot of massive amounts of people moved down here. And if you know anything about this part of the U.S., it's something like, I don't know, like there's no natural feature above 12 feet above the sea level, or some height like that. There's no like 30-foot mountains, or hills that are natural. You can build them today with modern tractors and dirt moving machinery. But it was something like that. And maybe it's 25 feet. I don't know. But it's really flat. And so and the big thing was obviously along the coast, because that's where, hey, the beaches are, and it's fun because inside is swampy and ugly, and you don't really want to go there until Disney starts transforming the land later on and creating Disney World and other theme parks end up showing up. But most everyone wants to be on the coast, so they're not used to, they're used to maybe people knowing storms, but they're not used to hurricanes. So it really gets really big, comes over the eye. It's like perfect, peaceful, placid. Everybody comes outside, and then boom, and this I think hits sort of right over the Keys, and some, I don't know specifically in Miami, but I think literally like 10,000 people die in this storm, and it's not even well documented. And this is all in like 37 or so, late 37, summer, I don't know, but the exact time. But this hits, and people are outside, and it goes from like 0 to 100 miles an hour in wind, and it just bam, as opposed to the slowly building up. So people are outside, and they're picked up by the storm, or things are just slammed into them. You can see, I saw recently like a coconut tree, or just some palm tree that had a huge like 2x4 spiky that had broken off from the building, just shoved right through it. Somehow it hit it like a spike, and it was done by the wind. So people are just hit by this debris and killed, and without any warning. And these are a lot of northeastern Americans. These weren't a lot of people. They didn't know what to expect. And so this land speculation, and it hit people not just here, but it hit people everywhere else that had been speculating in Florida land. That, in combination with buying stocks on a margin, you used to, before Black Friday, be able to come in and go, hey, the stock market, which was just going up and going up and going up. Individual stocks might go down a bit, but it was just going up because everybody was pouring money into it. The value of the stock became unseparated from what shall we say, the dividends of the stock. The idea of a stock is that you own a percentage of a company, and Alexandra Large, thanks for following the channel. And so you would buy this stock on a margin, it's going up, and that's a percentage, like you'd put in like 20% of the stock, you'd buy it. And so the value of the idea is, so if the company's making money, you get a percent of the money that the stock is being made. But with the value, it's going up, so people are buying it, so they buy it as speculation, not as I'm going to make $1 a month or $100 a month for each share of stock. Um, you're buying it because the value of the stock itself is going up to resell it. So it becomes unconnected with the actual value of the company that the stock represents. And people were buying it on the margin. So, like I was saying, that's like a percent of it. So you didn't necessarily have all the money, and they didn't have bankruptcy laws like we do today. So that you had the situation where you had to pay it off. So when the stock market collapses or starts to collapse, starts to go down, people can't cover their margins. So this collapses the U.S. stock market. I don't see in any of their talks why it's particularly that you're having this reason for Black Monday that it goes into panic. They don't explain it well, and it's a short thing, but it's sort of unique to the U.S. as to why that happened. It can't happen today because we don't allow people to buy stocks on margin. If it's a $10 stock, for each share you got to put $10 down. So if the stock goes down, or it still lose half its value, you still have $5. So it's not a panic situation, and it's not a collapse of the economy situation. Okay, so let's get going. So we have the state of the economy, national focus complete. We have run on the banks. German citizens, panicked by the collapse of the Berlin stock market, are rushing to make bank runs to withdraw their assets. The banks cannot afford to give out such sums, and many are in danger of collapse. Many are clamoring for immediate government intervention to stabilize this unprecedented financial crisis. Okay, we can close the banks temporarily. Massive hit to political power. Guarantee the holdings of private individuals. That means basically your speculators, your other types aren't going to be, or even the bank might collapse, but someone's going to be able to get their money, their individual monies out, or do nothing, which is worse. So we're going to take the least bad option political power speaking, and guarantee private individuals. Well, the vast colonial empire, I would presume, especially as they're talking about trade with China, that it can be a revenue generating source. The idea of colonial empires had been for autocracies. I have trouble saying that word. That basically means a closed economy that is stable and big enough self-funding, meaning the colonies provide resources that get sent back to, and it doesn't have to be this model, but with the colonies it generally is. They provide resources that get sent back to manufacturing centers. The manufacturing centers produce a lot of cheap goods. Some of it goes to the sort of home country, but a lot of it gets sold back to the people in other parts of the world. And so, like, if you look at Gandhi and his protest, he in India they produced a lot of cotton, but it was illegal to spin cotton into thread and then to weave it into cloth under the British Empire, because what they wanted to have happen is to have that cotton grown in India, picked, baled up, shipped to Britain, and then put in modern industrial factories, spin it into thread and weave it into cloth, and then sell that cloth back to India. And something that can be done and sold to poor people in India because it's very cheaply made in Britain through its system. So it was illegal. So Gandhi was defying British law by spinning some of his own thread and by hand weaving it into cloth. So this was part of the protest. And now the problem with that whole system is that it's based on protecting labor of inefficiencies, of hand-loomed weavers, that they're never going to keep up with greater demand. But it was an act of defiance, and I think Gandhi knew that, was it? Decline in the war industry. As I've talked about before, war industries, if you have cold wars or threats of wars, war industries do very well during peacetime. It was the post-World War I war industry did so badly because there was this disarmaments movement, which I've talked about before. Wounded veterans, yeah, that could eat up a lot of funds if you're taking care of them better than the Weimar Republic. Yes, we need to keep political reserve, but we're going through this trauma time here, and it is bad. So, downfall and stability. Electoral gridlock in France. The Commune of France is the world's leading syndicalist nation, united as a federation of communes directed by the Committee de Salut Public, the chief executive. Ever since its inception, however, the Second Commune has no uniformity in its policies. Numerous factions rose, each with their own ideas, of which the path France should take. At the time of, as the time for revenge against Germany and the world revolution closes in, the CGT election in 1936 is set to be very important. It was so important, in fact, that none of the four factions could acquire a majority, much like before the election. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do here is end this episode, but none of you go away because I'm not ending the stream. I'm going to make several episodes in a row here. So hang on just a second here. Thanks everyone on YouTube for watching. Really do appreciate it. And if you would, please like the video. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to me. You can also subscribe over or follow over on Twitch. And of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, questions, corrections. I love hearing that. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron. Yeah, let me just read it. Harrison's too suppressed. Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, that could be why the economy is just not well explained, and it doesn't sort of match the element of it. Thanks, Demetzel. Yes, okay, concrete, and we'll do this before I start back up with the next episode. Concrete examples. One is the Democrats, and one of the leading Democrats calling for this is Hillary Clinton, is getting rid of the Electoral College in the United States so that the person who gets the most votes for president wins. Now, Republicans, once you're in a general election, once you've got past the primary, stop spending money in the state of California and in the state of New York because they know that since both those states are winner take all the electoral votes will go to the Democrats. So why visit those states other than to fundraise? So those are often small closed meetings, less than 100 people. So why visit those states once you're in a general election? And so how big the percentage that the Democrats win by in those states becomes immaterial. Now, if we were in a one man, one vote, everything equal in the U.S. for presidential elections, trust me, the Republicans would be contesting those states to make the margin not so big. But they want to do, and so it makes smaller states that have few citizens, often rural states, become very less powerful within the United States. So that they want to get rid of the Electoral College. The next thing they will be stating that they want to do is get rid of the U.S. Senate because it doesn't represent the people, and I'm stating something that they haven't nationally said, but I do believe it is the next step, is that they will want to get rid of the Senate or change the Senate in some way so that the people are now popularly elected and not two per state, so that they are discrediting the Constitution partially over its 3/5 clause, that all that the 3/5 clause, if you look it up, was to do was the Southern, they wanted to be able to have in the House of Representatives, to be able to have that you got a number of representatives, congressmen, based on the population of your state. Well, in the South, they wanted to base the population, well, there's lots and lots of black people, slaves, and they wanted to get that, but other states goes, well, but they're not even voting in your election because they're not allowed to. They're not even citizens. At the time, they weren't citizens of the United States, even though they were born here. So that they would be counted as 3/5 of a person, because otherwise the southern states, their population would be so much less than the North. Because the North had lots of people, as well as the South, but the North was a great majority of white. So that they are trying to discredit the Constitution based on this as being a white supremacist. The current mantra in America is everything, the government and the United States is white supremacist. It's based on white supremacy. The whites are supreme, which I find to be ridiculous. It's based on supremacy of the successful. Okay, you can see well before the American Civil War, non-whites being extremely successful. Won't go into details on that, but in some states, major plantations were with slaves were owned by black people, and they were part of the culture, particularly in Louisiana. So that basis is why they're trying to do this. They started with the statues of Confederates and wanting to tear them down. There is also now a move to tear down the statues of other slaveholders like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. Well, I can only judge a person within the context of the world as he understood it. I cannot judge Alexander the Great by Christian standards because he had never heard of Christ, barely even heard of what Jews were, and had no Christian values, shall we say, because that wasn't the world that he was raised in. So Alexander the Great, I judge him on the world in which he knew and he found himself in. So Washington and Jefferson found themselves in a world in which slaves were held, and they held them because in both of their cases, basically, they sort of inherited that sort of class. Now, Jefferson, who wrote the Constitution, was a slaveholder, and well, no, he was part of, but I really misspoke. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, where we hold these truths to be self-evident: all men are created equal, or I'm butchering that, but it goes on from there. Now, did Jefferson not believe this, and he held slaves? I believe he believed it, and he believed it about his slaves. But you see, Jefferson was doing something at the time. He was fighting for the U.S. independence, and I'll get to some of your other questions here in just a second. Don't worry. He was fighting for the U.S. independence, and he was pouring his personal money into that fight, even before it became formalized into the fight. So Jefferson had debts, okay? And in the state of Virginia, if you had slaves and you had debts, you could not free your slaves. You could sell your slaves. You could sometimes free some of your slaves, depending on conditions or whatever, in your will at your death. But you could not free any slave until every single one of your debts is paid for. Jefferson was never able to get out of debt in his lifetime because he had given so much to his nation that he never could get out of his debt. So he could never free his slaves. And he believed that founding of the United States was ultimately more important, the first Western Republic as he was seeing it, based on equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, but equality before the law and equality of opportunity. Because even if you look at places like the Netherlands, you still had, you know, the House of Orange and other ruling families. So he was doing for the greater good. So they were trying to discredit these people. Recently, within the last 4 weeks or so, in the city of Dallas, which is not the greater metroplex, but the actual, where's Dallas? It's up here. The actual city of Dallas is actually a very leftist governed city. Was debating removing the names of Washington, Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, from schools because they were slaveholders, and they were wanting to debate this, and that they should be removed because they're slaveholders. Benjamin Franklin was the man who founded the abolitionist movement in colonial America. These are educators trying to debate this thing, and they don't even know who Benjamin Franklin was. They did not know that he was an abolitionist. Benjamin Franklin joined and went to the church, and the Catholics in his community went to the church or the synagogue of the Jews in his community, went to the Protestant churches because he wanted to be part of everybody's community. Anybody who's going against Benjamin Franklin as being somehow an immoral person on those grounds. Oh, he liked the ladies, and he was sort of, as one person recently said, sort of the Hugh Hefner of his day, though he didn't publish pictures, but he was a ladies' man and other sorts of things. But on attitudes of today, Benjamin Franklin, and so these are idiots that are trying to dumb down our society. Now I'm going to scroll back up the text and look at a few of the questions here. So I hope that's enough concrete things there. Django? Yes, well, there is a distrust, and it goes back to our founding, that we were distrusting the government that we were trying to lead. And that is an important element, but doesn't democracy doesn't help it. Democracy is I know many of you come after, sort of maybe a bit after I started, but democracy is the tyranny of the majority. It is majority rule. It is the majority telling the minority, whether it's a minority in race or a minority in thought. You Christians or you Jews or whoever the minority is being ruled by the majority without a framework that protects the minority in the voting situation. So distrust of the government doesn't equal support for democracy. I've come to support term limits for Congress because I used to work for a congressman. He ain't the same guy now that he was 20 years ago. And he's changed a lot since he's been in Washington. And so, I mean, I knew him very, very well. And, you know, worked in his office, drove him around, talked to him for hours, you know, driving him from event to event while we were stuck in LA traffic. So, I mean, that's how I, you know, say knew him well, and we talked about things. So, he ain't the guy that he was when he went in. I won't mention his name. He's still in Congress. And he shouldn't be there anymore. So I've got to term limits now. Yes, well, yeah, like I explained, the colonists had their views, and it comes generally out of European views at the time, and I've discussed this, that people, they mistook a lack of education for a lack of ability. And just so that you know, the first person in the North American colonists, not the colonists of Latin America, but in North America, the first person in North America, in the colonies, to get slavery in the law as opposed to indentured service. Because a lot of, in the colonies, a lot of people go, hey, I can't afford the, let's say, in modern money, the $10,000 or $20,000 to get on a boat and go to America. I'll give you 5 years of my labor if you put me on a boat and take me to America. Indentured service, that was a big thing to get a lot of colonists over for, and so that they would come and give service, you know, work. And sometimes it was described as, oh, you're going to be working in a print shop, since we're on the Benjamin Franklin thing, or it might be you're going to be a farmer or whatever it was. So they were indentured servant. So there was indentured servant laws. And early on, some of the slaves that were brought here, well, they're just indentured servants because we brought them on the ships, so they have to pay their fee back. Now, of course, they didn't have the choice of whether they got on the boat or not, but they had to pay it back. The man who went to court to get in law in the first, I forget which colony it was at the time, but the first English colony in North America, to get into law that, no, it wasn't an indentured servants. It was, I own this man. I own him. The first man to go to court and do that was black. A black man was owning another black man. That's who got it into North American colonial law. So if you want to talk about ironic, know that it was a black man who started slavery, not indentured service, but slavery in North America. So you have to understand the world in which these people lived is different than our understanding of the world today. So if somebody today was advocating slavery, I think the guy's nuts and shouldn't be listened to. But if you're looking, well, but Washington has slavery. Yeah, because that was the world that he grew up in. That's what he knew. I'm sure that there are some things that today, that in the future they'll think we're nuts for allowing or not allowing. And so, what, you allowed people to smoke cigarettes? And so people will be nuts. Because when I grew up as a child, women who were pregnant smoked cigarettes and drank alcohol. No one societally thought it was bad or wrong. Today, we would go, what? You're pregnant and you're smoking? What's wrong with you? Now, some people are so hooked on it, they're still going to do it, but they're going to try to hide it. So people's understanding of things change. Well, the German federal elections. I had one person who was German and whatever sort of bemoaned the outcome that Merkel won the majority. But my understanding is that CDU, CSU, I forget which one is just for Bavaria, got the lowest election showings in the last, 20 or 30 years. I am worried about German far-right parties, because German far-right parties in the past have done bad things, the National Socialists. So is the sort of, I forget the name of it, the sort of the far-right party, is it just going to secure the borders and kick out the unwelcome masses that came in, or is it going to start hunting down and kicking out the, I don't know, the Turks or the Kurds or whoever that have been there for 50 years and they're born there? How far are they going to go? That's sort of the problem that I think Germans have with the far right. So I'm sort of satisfied. I think the CSU, CDU should kick Merkel out. I'm surprised they're keeping her around. Maybe there's just no one else in the party. I don't know what well enough to be able to take over for her. But they should kick her out, because actually, from what little I know of Merkel, I think I like a lot of the things that she's doing, except what she's doing with the open borders, letting all the people thing in. I mean, just the things like good governance. I don't have a big problem with the general sort of CDU, CSU, with that sort of element. What business decisions to make for Germany or something. I don't have those problems with Merkel. Maybe I would if I knew it better. And I'm not saying you shouldn't if you live there have problems with it, but that's sort of how I view it. And so low showings means that it's a wake-up call, because they're going to keep keep getting worse if they don't adjust their. Well, yeah, you shouldn't distrust anybody in power, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be in power. It just means you got to watch them. No, the Electoral College is a fundamental principle that recognizes the idea that 2 or 3 states or 4 states with all the population, because people seem to like to go to California and New York and Chicago and like Florida or Texas. Those states should not rule America. So you need the ability to have other states have input into who becomes president. Yeah, no, that's fine. You guys can leave. I'm just scrolling through what you said here. Well, yes, they were slaves before they reached America, but they weren't slaves under the rules of the colony at the time. See, each colony had its own charter and its own rules. I think, I may be wrong about this, but Pennsylvania, I'm just sort of taking it on who founded Pennsylvania, probably would never have allowed slavery. But I think Massachusetts did allow slavery. And though there weren't big slave plantations up in Massachusetts colony, and so each colony had its own rules, its own laws, and so the mere fact that you were a slave in a Portuguese ship traveling on the Atlantic Ocean doesn't mean that when you show up in America that you would still be a slave. So that's what I'm talking about. So yes, they were prisoners. Now, of course, if you know anything about the slave trade as it was known in the sort of triangle trade and what was going on in that period of time, white people didn't take slaves. It was one black African tribe would go raid a different black African tribe, grab prisoners, sell them to slave traders on the coast, which were generally all the guards and everybody were basically black Africans, with just a few white people standing around making the money and paying it. So slaves were captured by black Africans, sold to other people. So you have to understand the world in which it was functioning. Again, I'm not saying that this world is right, good, or acceptable. It is just what was. Okay, the AFD. Okay. Yes, I agree. Yes, about the what is it? The Free Democrats are now back in Parliament again after um, sort of going away because of losing support, and so that really shows. And I was watching the electoral results. See, I'm enough of a government nerd that I was sort of watching the results and stuff, but I forget exactly who the parties who got what. But they're sort of back, which really shows that the the left, the SPD, is not the big winner for the downfall of the CDU. Um, it's not moving from left to right. It's some moving further to the right, some moving sort of more or less, as I understand it, more to the center. And it's dissatisfaction, I think, mostly over the immigration issue and how to deal with the stuff. Maybe some of it over Merkel and her support for the EU going as far as it is, but I don't know how much Germans today want to be part of the EU and don't. I just don't have a good handle on that at all, but I figure that is. Oh yes, I'm all for Brexit. The idea of a common market for Europe is fine, but as I was talking earlier, I don't know if you were there, but about states, governments, and empires based around nations and multinations. To have a nation, you have to have a consensus of culture and identity. Otherwise, you have an empire. Now, it can be an empire of bureaucrats without an emperor, a single ruler. It could just be many bureaucrats running you. But the EU is not the United States. The United States, 49 of the 50 states basically either English is the official language or there is no official language, but it's basically English. Now, I live in California. They print all the documents in all kinds of crazy languages, and I mean like that, like in Cambodian. We have a Cambodian population here, but you need to print everything in Cambodian also. The one state that has two official languages is New Mexico. It is also Spanish. That goes back to its Spanish heritage as a state and as a territory beforehand. All the rest of the states, obviously in like Louisiana, there's a lot of French speaking. Again, I live in California, which was, I think it was either 4 or 6 days an independent republic that was very popular amongst the Spanish speaking people here. If you want to know the truth, much of America that was once part of the Spanish Empire was never really part of Mexico, because basically, and some of them basically go from being part of Mexico to being part of the United States. I mean, not sorry, part of Spain to be part of the United States without going through the stage of being through Mexico. The others, it was very tempestuous, and the northern, briefly Mexicans, as national identity people, really didn't like the Mexico government down in Mexico City. And so they didn't like that. And so it's really more the breakup of the Spanish Empire to understand. And so culturally, we have a long Hispanic culture here, and I'm happy with that. But we have to have an understanding that English is our basic cultural language, and we have certain cultural values. And if you don't share those values, you're not a nation. And so EU is a bunch of different groups, and if you're also including Turkey and you're including Portugal and Greece and England, what's your common language? Is it going to be English? Are they going to be happy teaching in English in all the schools? So yeah, Brexit is a definitely something that is good. So a common market, and if they want to keep Britain in a common market, meaning be able to trade with Europe, okay, fine. But that's different than letting in whoever other people want to, and it's also different than letting EU bureaucrats tell Britain how it has to do things internally. Yes, the Libertarian Party. So I sort of look at that between the Conservatives and the Socialists as sort of the centralist party. Yes. Well, where is sovereignty? That is a critical, fundamental thing. Goes back to legitimacy of government. What is sovereign within your country? Is it the monarch? Is it that one person on top? And you know what? In the Middle Ages, when 95+% of the people couldn't read a single word, they might be able to recognize a symbol or recognize a few letters together, for pub or tavern or something that they sort of recognize, but they really couldn't read a sentence. Should those people be making decisions for a national thing? I would say no. So in the Middle Ages, when people can't read and write, I'm for a monarchy or an aristocracy, that rules, or a mix of monarchs and aristocracy. So they are sovereign then. But that doesn't mean that that's what I want for a modern society in which people can read, write, and they can read Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Karl Marx, Adam Smith, both his economic views, but also his moral sentiments. They go to governance. They can read all these things. People can read all of this stuff, and so that's once you get that, then where does the sovereignty lie? Is it in an individual? Is it in the bureaucracy? Or is it with the people? And that is what was happening. That is what is happening in Europe. Where is sovereignty in Spain right now today, to this very day? We're seeing, I guess it's tomorrow they vote on Sunday in Spain or in Catalonia there, whether they go independent. Now, whether the Spanish government, does the Spanish government have the right to force its national borders on it, or is it local majority rule? Who is sovereign in Spain? Is it the local people of a town, a region, a city, or is it the EU people, or is it the Spanish national government? And under the EU, you don't have that viewpoint. I used to very actively, including like going to Scotland, work for Scottish independence. I am now against Scottish independence because, see, I'm an American of Scottish descent, as you can probably tell from the logos around the channel. But Americans believe in sovereignty. We believe in independence of an individual, and that goes back to some degree our Scottish heritage, if you look at some of that, but of a government. And I've come to understand when Scots wanted independence, they didn't want independence. They did not want independence. They don't want independence. All the people that are now complaining in Scotland about Brexit are the independence voters. What they wanted is local regional control within the EU. They want to be part of the EU. They don't want to be independent. They want to be not under the London government, most assuredly. They want their own city council within the new EU world. They don't want to be, hey, we're independent. We may not even be a member of the UN. What's I believe one of the nations who is not currently in the UN? Can anybody say right now type in a nation that isn't in the UN, I believe? I may be wrong. I know it used to be this way. Nation we all know. I don't know that we all know what. No, a nation that was there before the founding of the UN and is still there to this day. A nation that everyone recognizes that it's an independent nation. Nope. Taiwan that's the Republic of China. That is. It's Switzerland. I believe the Swiss are still not in the EU or the UN. I know they weren't before. So the Swiss, because they're neutral, they're not in the UN because the UN is a governing body. The Swiss are independent. Somebody can look that up if they want to right now on Wikipedia and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But I do believe they are still not in the UN. That's why the Swiss Red Cross are a neutral arbiter between many peoples and conflicts. And so they want independency. And so they don't necessarily want to be held to laws of other people have made for them. So this is what the Scots, the people that want UN, they don't want to be sovereign. They want to give up their sovereignty, but they want equal levels of giving it up as the French people do, as opposed to having an intermittent. Okay, so now they've joined in 2002. I'm a bit older, my education, maybe a bit out of date on some of that stuff. So only in 2002 did the Switzerland join the UN. So, you know, I mean, that should tell you several things, but that is what being independent means. Another interesting fact about Switzerland is their citizens are barred by international law from joining other people's militaries because they're such a violent people. So they're barred from joining other nations' armies, except for, as you mentioned it there, the Vatican. They can join the Vatican Guard, but they are not allowed to join anybody else's armies. They couldn't go into the French Foreign Legion. They couldn't do anything else. Right of center on the political compass thing. I would like to see libertarianism work, but I don't really believe that people will be good enough citizens to read and understand and make good votes. So I probably a little more government than that, but that would be a nice idea, libertarianism. But we can see how popular it is in the U.S. Not very. Okay, we're going to start another episode here, recording this. So we'll try to more flow with this. It's being recorded only on the stream chat, which I can download and save, which I plan on doing so, but I didn't want it to be all part of Kaiserreich. You people here are interested in some of my political thoughts, and I appreciate that, and I think to sort of be different from an average sort of YouTuber, giving some of that is good, but too much of it, I think, puts off too many people. I'll be right back. Just hold on just a second. Thanks, Dermetzel. Okay, we're gonna start another episode here. Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Kaiserreich. And of course, we're playing as Germany. Okay, the Fifth Anglo-Afghani War has started after the Walter Craig, the British Raj, collapsed into turmoil. Warfare in the neighboring kingdom of Afghanistan took advantage of this as an opportunity to seize Peshawar and Quetta, both border regions. However, the Afghani government attempts to modernize over the last decades have been met with fierce resistance. The conservative elements within the country, the King Abdullah Khan, now hopes to use the turmoil in Delhi to, following the death of George V, to his advantage by repeating the success of the Fourth Anglo-Afghani War. Now, one thing about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is dictated by its geography. Hey, British Telecom, good to see you there. Siberian Division useful. Django. I don't know what you're talking about specific. Be a little more specific. Well, hopefully I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. Sound like I'm in the news. But Afghanistan is defined by its geography. Partially, it's poor geography, meaning poor for human use. Lack of natural resources or reasons for people to want to conquer it. But also because of its such rugged and hard to move around geography, as it says, the king is trying to modernize. Well, you can modernize Kabul. It's a pretty big city, pretty big open area, and you can do that, as well as Kandahar and Herat up here, and some of the other places in Afghanistan. And yes, I know the geography more than most people of Afghanistan. You can modernize those things, but to get past the city, to get out into the countryside, it's just because it is so cut off, so tribal. And it would be tribal, and I can knock tribalism, but as you know from my logos, I'm into my Scottish heritage. We're into tribalism. We're into mountainous, the Highlanders, mountainous regions and identifying by ourselves. So the mere fact that it's tribal is not necessarily a bad thing. It's sort of regressive and lacking of central authority and other things. So that sort of defines what Afghanistan is to this day. Now they've gotten out all this extra territory, which a good chunk of that is still the sort of what a Northwest Territory that is still rather tribal to this day in Pakistan. And it is firearms are legal there. Most of Pakistan, it is like a death sentence or some sort of situation if you have firearms. They're extremely banned. But up in this part of the region, it is still perfectly legal to buy, sell, and own, manufacture firearms. In Peshawar, there is a localized firearm industry in which they make hand-make firearms still to this day. My granddad went there back the late 70s, early 80s, and found it very interesting. Almost brought me back a little pen gun, a gun that looked like a ballpoint pen that fired 22 caliber bullets, just a single one. He didn't, mainly because he didn't know what my parents' reaction would be, giving me at, I don't know, 10 years old or 12 years old or something, giving me a firearm. But he almost smuggled one out for me. Figured that he could do that. That's how much the world has changed. So we don't care about Afghanistan. I think we're going to remain authoritarian democracy is my current plan. Okay. Black Week comes soon. Now, I haven't done another national focus because I was waiting for this. The situation hardly improved in the days following Black Monday, which was the start of what became known as Black Week. Panic selling of stocks reached an all-time high. as people tried to dump their stocks before they became worthless. When the Berlin stock market closed at the end of the week, the market was dead as the 11 major economic experts and top executives in Germany had committed suicide. The government had to act. Okay, we must reform the economy now. So, we're going to start that. Dig our way out of this hole. Okay. Abstract terrorizes the cities. With the devastating economic situation, many families struggling to earn their daily bread, and social security net is strained beyond the breaking point. That means it broke. Now, the last weeks, the streets of many German cities have been increasingly terrorized by gangs of teenagers. These Habstreik steal products from the markets, shops, and often money from innocent pedestrians, commit acts of vandalism, and escape boredom and frustration. More and more citizens do not feel safe anymore in the streets. Okay, we're going down this. Financial troubles in the colonies. Rising inflation and consequently debased Reichsmark. Now, this is something that I have a little bit of a problem with. This is, they talk about rising inflation and debasing of the Reichsmark. I don't, okay, you know, I can say I'm not an economist, and I'm not an economist. I've had economy courses, and as you know, I study things. I don't see a reason for inflation here, because inflation happened in Germany because Germany had, you know, the Weimar Republic I'm talking about, had reasonably justifiable war reparations to give. Yes, I know we may have Germans watching this channel or this thing, but when Austria goes to war with Serbia, when Russia decides to protect its Serb allies, and the German Empire decides to agree to support its Austro-Hungarian allies against Russia, knowing that Russia does have a defense agreement with France, but Russia did attack Austria, and Germany just coming to its aid doesn't necessarily mean that France is going to come into the war, but may mean that France is going to come into the war. But Belgium isn't coming into the war. Belgium is going to stay out of the war. And so Germany invades Belgium, and it's only the invasion of Belgium, a state set up by Britain, does Britain get into the war. So Germany has blatantly expanded the war, in my opinion, for national defense, you know, no justifiable national defense reason, just because it was the Schlieffen Plan, and just because in the 18th century, generally speaking, you could march across other people's territories peacefully to get at a third party somewhere else. That wasn't what was going on in nation states, and so Germany, yeah, justifiably has to pay reparations. So they have to pay reparations, and then they can't afford it, so they borrow money from the United States to pay their reparations, and then they got to pay the United States reparations back. So that's what causes the inflation in Germany, where, as I was talking in the previous episode about Black Friday in the United States and the U.S. Depression, we actually had deflation in the United States during the Great Depression, not inflation. Meaning that factories could produce things, but nobody had the money to buy them, so the people were willing to take pay cuts just to keep some sort of job, so they could lower the prices down. And resource manufacturers, miners, loggers, whatever, couldn't sell their resources to anybody because people weren't selling their finished products, so they were selling their resources cheaper because, hey, half a job, because they didn't have social security systems set up before FDR in the United States, so you didn't have unemployment insurance, you didn't have various programs, at least not on a national level. There were other schemes, but not on the national level, to deal with unemployment. So half a job is better than no job. So you had a deflationary situation. It is only because of untethering the money from, in which they may be untethering the money from gold or silver, but that may or may not be happening. But I don't see where inflation necessarily comes into this. I think they're channeling Weimar a little too much into the Kaiserreich. I'm going to pause here and look at the chat stream here. Okay, well, I'll look at that a little bit later. Oh, I can see some of the civil wars they're talking about. Yes, Britain does violate others' neutrality. That is true, but you see, you got to understand something. Britain won the war, and it can come down to just simply that. You can get away with a lot if you win the war. So you can also look at the idea that Britain was Greece's protector, because Britain also functionally set up Greece. Corfu was the only part of Greece never occupied by the Turks or any other Muslim areas, and for a while it voluntarily joined the British Empire. And so the Greeks in Corfu area are different than Greeks everywhere else. And Britain very much helped the Greeks get their independence from Turkey. So you can sort of say that there's sort of some protectivity there. Okay, rising inflation. Some maverick politicians propose raising taxes, but raising taxes on German nationals just to aid German colonials would obviously be not popular, especially not under the presence of economic situation. Most of the Reichstag merely proposed limited financial support for our colonial possessions, which raise taxes. Well, that's just digging us way deep in a hole. Help. Well, both of these have. Well, we're gonna go the middle route. We're already deep enough, so we can afford to go, excuse me, a little deeper. Yeah, you can look at that, but if you look at the 1920s, how many civil wars were there then? You have the German Civil War, the Spartacus uprising in, referring to some of the stuff on chat here, the Spartacus uprising in Berlin, the Nazi Ludendorff mix sort of pseudo Bavarian independence outbreak that lasted a few hours of a war. You have, of course, the Russian Civil War. You have various Balkanite type wars that would become sort of civil. The Ottoman Empire kicking out the Greeks and that sort of wars. So you have a lot of sort of 1920s stuff that would, you know, well, obviously the Russian Civil War. Okay, so we're in the Second Russian Civil War. This is different than my last playthrough. The Second Russian Civil War, a mere 20 years ago, the last years of the Walter Craig, the Russian Empire collapsed in turmoil, ripping apart between nationalist movements, the Whites, and the Reds. After a German intervention, the Republican government defeated the Bolsheviks, but it appears that the Russian revolutionary spirit is not exhausted. After ineffective land reform by Kerensky government and the austerity measures to pay off Brest-Litovsk reparations, as well as the crisis in government after the president's assassination, the cities in the western part of the nation have been engulfed with the red tide once more. Will Bukharin's Soviet Russia prevail, or will the loyalists of the white government defeat the disasters a second time? That's an interesting development. Civil war in Russia. The crisis in Russia has reached frightening levels of intensity once more. Red and white forces are at war. We have seen the horrors of Bolshevism once before. Although our own workers may not like it, it is probably in our best interest to help the legitimate Russian government. We can send volunteers, manpower, which we don't have any, but okay. We can only spare some supplies. We cannot spare any of these. Well, how much? Well, let's send them the volunteers. Maybe there's negative blowback on us, but hello, Boss Bear. How you doing? And thanks for following. I do appreciate that, Boss Bear. And the Night Reaver. Good to see you again. Okay, the Kenyatta Sof affair. An unusual case has reached the highest courts in the German state. Anti-colonialist activist Jomo Kenyatta. It's sounding like maybe it's somebody else, but it's sounding like one of the Rhodesian or somebody. No, maybe that's Tanzanian guy. The name sounds familiar to me. Okay. Has brought a class action suit against the former Afrikaan stadtholder Willem Self. The case has become something of an embarrassment. As some of the plaintiffs are veterans of the Great War, it is not easily dismissed. They claim that Self's administration harmed them through policies of illegal land seizures and event abdications and abductions, okay, and torture. It's maybe just badly written. All done with Self's knowledge and little legal basis. Quietly, the Foreign Office has explained to the government that such things are common and necessary in our colonial administration. They are strongly urged we quash this motion. Okay. The court has no right to rule on Middle African affairs. What's the worst that could happen? Yeah, I think we're going to stay out of Middle Africa. I don't trust Goring. Goring was very much of a climber, as one would say, and climbers in and of themselves are not a bad thing, and that is sort of maybe coming out of English cultural viewpoint, meaning people that don't know their station are trying to climb out of it. Sorry about that. Climbing out of your social station isn't bad, but Goring, it seems, was very much willing to do it in a sort of a brutal way. Now, obviously, we see that ultimately with his involvement with the Nazis, but, and this may be post looking back at it, but he was not very popular when he took over the flying circus. Because you got to remember, Goring was a super popular with the masses ace after World War I. So, you know, I don't trust him. Of course, history shows that out to be a good thing, but even here within this Kaiserreich, I'm not trusting him. All of the Italian Federation mourns the death of His Holiness Pope Pius XI, who passed away in his sleep after having been in declining health for the past several years. The Holy Father will soon be interred with the rest of his predecessors in the tomb of the popes until the next pope can be chosen. The Italian Federation will be ruled by a college of cardinals in Rome. The succession of His Holiness is made all the more important due to the Catholic Church's role in the government of the nation, as well as the vehement opposition to syndicalism, a force which has divided Italy and created the Southern Breakaway Republic. How terrible. Yes, this breakaway republic. We're back to the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Yes, we are going to maybe limit some of Goring's ambitions on some of that. I've run into the Portugal situation where he wants to seize land, and I don't think we're going to let him do that. Remilitarization of Olentia. The Treaty of Bucharest of 1918 officially ended the Weltkrieg for Romania, but at a high cost. The nation was now dominated by the German and Austrian industries. Olentia was demilitarized, and the oil fields were leased to Germany up to the distant 2012. Humiliation of Romania resulted in its devolving into a nationalist populist dictatorship led by Conductor Cordenu and his Iron Guard, set up to restore the Romanian what it says it should have been, a titan of the Balkans. The first major move conducted by the conductor is the remilitarization of Olentia, a strategic region in Wallachia with large oil reserves and military industry. The world is changing. Okay, agricultural crisis in Middle Europa. During this time of great crisis, the agricultural sector of Germany, of the German economy, is one of the most vulnerable. Sorry, man, I should learn to read this better. To turmoil. With this in mind, several Junkers representing the landed nobility of the Kingdom of Prussia have asked for protectionist legislation and subsidies to their production. By imposing tariffs on foreign produce, we will strengthen this important sector of the Reich's economy. Such a measure will likely cause further damage to the economy of our neighbors. However, as they are greatly dependent on trade with Germany, the wheat crops in Ukraine are particularly vulnerable. We must protect our own peasants, promise help. We're going to promise help because I don't want to lose my allies. I'm knowing we're going into chaos here, but if we can ride through the chaos, maybe we can come out on the end much stronger. Yeah, okay, I butcher English too. It's my Californian vernacular. Though generally speaking, most of the British people I met could understand me at least. Representatives from numerous syndicalist and socialist nations have gathered in Paris today in what might just be a defining moment in the history of the ideologies. The French Commune has invited numerous countries to the first official gathering of the members of the Third International to discuss political, foreign matters and cooperation on the spreading of socialism further. The French opened the International with a powerful parade, festivities in Paris, and finally a speech by the chairman of the CSP. Topics like Spain, the United States, and the world economic crisis are at the top priority, and it is expected that France and Britain will take the initiative in the gathering. Okay, I want to say something here about this. Weltkrieg, is that better? Weltkrieg? one of the persons that is having, my opinion, and to some degree Kaiserreich has shown this to me, on the left in Weltkrieg, on the left to this day, that is, I think, is overlooked. And I have a degree in political science. It comes from a California university. They weren't quite as crazy back then as the universities in California are today. I was an outspoken voice on the right. I knew literally the political science department head, had him as a teacher in multiple classes, got A's in his classes. He was a Latin American specialist. But I was, like I say, one of the 2 or 3 publicly acknowledged outspoken people on the right in the political science department. And I'm not saying I got an A in every class, but I got A's in many or most of them. I was well known by the students and disliked by many of them because I disrupted the course by asking questions that weren't on the test. Most of the students, even at that time, is this on the test? Do I need to know this to pass the course? No. So they got upset because they just wanted to be able to pass the damn course. They weren't interested in learning. Some of them were upset with my political views, most assuredly, but I was more unpopular for doing interesting discussions, as you can maybe tell. But I was not necessarily unpopular with my professors because I was well informed and could talk on the subjects and did very well. Like I say, to the point that my department head wrote, "Oh, yeah, you want to take a semester off from the course for academic credit to go study British history and politics? Sure, go ahead." Maybe that was partly just to get me out of their hair for a semester or so, but they were happy to sign off on things like that. So they knew who I was, and I have a strong background in politics. And yes, I would say all of my professors were at least socialists in the department, and I mean all of them. And I knew most of them in the department well enough to say that. I would be shocked and surprised if at the time there wasn't at least a socialist. The rest, not all of them were socialists, but they were at least socialists, if not communists or other sorts of things. But the most influential man on the left to this day is Joseph Stalin. I've come to understand this more so than Marx, more so than Lenin. It is Stalin. Because Stalin's biggest enemies, the people that he hated the most, the people that he fought hardest against, wasn't the monarchists, wasn't the capitalists, it wasn't even the fascists, though those were big enemies too. It was other leftist elements. Now, the fascists can sort of be described as the left, but their big difference was as they believe in nationalism. You'll get to this in a minute. The biggest import of Stalin was doctrinaire agreement and the idea that you must toe the party line. You must be, because the internationals that were held in the Soviet Union very much were this. We weren't going to allow deviation from the party line, to the point that when Nazis hate communists, communists hate Nazis, they're the most hated people in the world. Oh, Hitler and Stalin just signed a joint treaty of friendship. Oh, yay! So the communists in France started supporting Nazis because they were allied with Joseph Stalin, so they must be good guys. Well, maybe they're not, but they're allied, so we're going to help support the Nazis because, over Poland. And there was a time, up until the German invasion of the Soviet Union, that the communists were very quiet in occupied France and other places because Stalin told them, or the party ruled by Stalin told them to be so. So they would stomp out syndicalism. They would stomp out radical anarchism. They would stomp out any sort of communist deviation from the Soviet party line, and this mentality is still to this day in the left. You don't have there is not a syndicalist party that holds an office, in my opinion, anywhere in the world. I would be shocked if there's even a town council member somewhere in Spain that oh, I'm part of the syndicalist party. There's definitely zero syndicalism in the United States in any political thought. There is on the left, as it's described, anarchism is just violence for violence sake to this day, because you're no longer, oh, the rulers are in palaces and the poor people are in slums, or actually starving. Not just, oh, we, get government assistance and live in, bad homes, but starving. Like you can look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire or something. So the anarchists want justice and are going to try to assassinate, like, Archduke Ferdinand, which those were sort of actually Serbian ultranationalists, but you get the point. So you no longer have that sort of, at least in most things. Yes, you're right to point out the Spanish Civil War. That is, Django, that is because of Stalin. They died out there because Stalin would send weaponry. The Soviet agents in the Spanish Republic decided who got the great bulk of the weaponry and the ammunition. Those were going to units that were Stalinist, loyalists, communists. The great bulk of it did. So if you were a Trotskyite communist, you didn't get weapons, or good weapons, or the new weapons. You didn't get the good stuff. And also during the Spanish Civil War, what they would do is they would send order, because they got commissars, and the commissars were appointed by the people who were giving the Republicans the weapons, the Soviets, and would order the anarchists or the syndicalists or the Trotskyite brigade to go take that hill. You're ordered to take that hill. What if you're not going to go charge up that hill? We're going to shoot you. So they go charge up the hill and die. And you can look at some of the books on the Spanish Civil War. I forget the author right now. I can look it up. Did some really good historical fiction. It's good writing, plus it's good history too. That's what good historical fiction is it puts a few fictional characters into history so that they can sort of tell the story that's the real history going around them. And so that they would send the other groups up to fight and die while they kept the Soviet good armed equipped units purely on the defensive and not do any of these crazy last-ditch defensive, hold this building or this university until the last person or we'll shoot you kind of thing. That's how they got rid of the anarchists, the syndicalists, the socialists, the other people. In my opinion, by the time you would have gotten done with the Spanish Civil War, it would have been a Soviet republic of one form or another. Right off without any reference, I don't know who Eric Blair is, but so that is why I say one of the most influential men on the left is Stalin. Is that they because what's sort of on the right, if you will, and unacceptable to the left in America is libertarianism, which is sort of rational anarchism. Well, I know who George Orwell is. Yeah. Oh, and I've recently come across a picture of him in Spain during the Civil War, because I know he was a socialist of some sort. In Spain in the Civil War with the writer, for whom the bell tolls. I'm talking about. Oh, Eric Blair is Orwell's real name. Okay, well, see. Oh, Hemingway. Yep, that's who I'm talking about. Hemingway, the writer. See, I mind blank on some of these things. Picture of they were both in the picture. Hemingway was in the background. I didn't know Orwell's real name was Eric Blair. Okay, and I have read some Orwell. and Orwell was definitely talking about the dangers of. I know Orwell was a socialist, but you can look at the Animal Farm to realize that he did understand some of the dangers of it. But this orthodoxy that was put on them, and like libertarianism, in my opinion, is rational anarchism, is a minimalist state with a fewest possible governmental controls, most freedom, practical, but still recognizing you need a police force. They got to, if there's a serial killer living next to you, you got to have a police force to arrest him, and you got to have somebody paying some taxes to afford some sort of army. And so rational people that are want to be sort of minimalist rational anarchists are libertarians, but libertarians are not accepted on the left in America because they deviate from the socialist big government pattern. Now, not all leftists today are Stalinist communists. That's definitely not the case. But they put this orthodoxy of a socialist viewpoint as opposed to syndicalists. Syndicalists, as I understand it, believe in communal owning of the means of production, but of a limited community, meaning the workers of one factory own that means of production. I don't know if they have to own it all equally, but they all own it. So to a point, it's stock ownership, maybe without being able to trade and without being unequal ownership. But that factory can compete against the factory in the next door, or the next province, or somewhere else. So there's still a market competition going on with syndicalism. I'm sure that they want free health care and other socialist type elements, but you have this market dynamic element that you don't have in socialism that has been crushed. The Road to Weak and Pure. I don't know that book. Let me see how little I know. So yeah, so that's why I say that Stalin, with his orthodoxy, is still the biggest impact on the left, and not Lenin, not Marx, because without Stalin, I don't think Marx would have as big an impact. Marx and Engels. The Reds are meeting to coordinate their activities, which are definitely aimed against order we have established in Europe following our victory in the Weltkrieg. Got to relearn these things. We must watch this meeting and analyze the results closely. Okay, well, we already have the results, or some of the results here in Moscow. We no longer get the effects of our holdings. Yes, thanks for that warning about France. And I did do this. I actually made, no, I won't just go here. If this sounds like I've sort of done some of this before, I've actually made this episode and the previous one sort of before. I have 3 unreleased episodes of Kaiserreich, but when I found out, let's put you on a train. When I found out that supposedly by the 1st of the month, and they did do it, that they were going to be releasing a new Kaiserreich, I thought I better just wait for this version here. Okay. So you're right, I need to be prepared for a possible war, and I want to hold the Belgian line. Well, yeah, Lenin was the popular figurehead, but I really think it's the orthodoxy that Stalin not enforced within Russia, but enforced in the world generally. I don't know that Lenin would have done that. Maybe he would have. I see Stalin as such a bad guy, and I see him as a France shows its true face. The Reds are clearly set to spread their poison, as they clearly shown during the last session of the elections. We must be prepared for anything. I see Stalin as a power-hungry madman who, shall we say, only incidentally was a communist. And so he tried to remove all threats to his regime. He did not see the czars as a, they were the main family was dead, but the czars as a threat to his regime. He did not see the British monarchy as a threat to his regime, because they weren't going to convince his regime to overthrow him. He saw deviations on the left as a threat to his regime, so that's what he put down. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. No. Lenin isn't a good guy. He's portrayed as a good guy nowadays, but he was not a good guy. I just really see that Stalin is the one that really sort of enforced it. Okay. Oswald Mosley, elected as chairman of the TUC in 1936, the trade union congress in the Union of Britain, has made out to be decisive. Longtime chairman of the TUC, Philip Snowden, declared his resignation, causing 4 major factions in the Union: Marxist, autonomist, federalist, and congregationalist, to butt heads over the position. As the dust settled, Oswald Mosley, leader of the Marxist and totalist ideologue, has been appointed as the new chairman. Mosley's faction supports a strong central government, full state control of the economy, and much more in favor of military action and British nationalism. Manufacturing, yes. You have to understand that Mosley was really a man of the left, though what you really do sort of see with the left, or with the fascist left, if you will, is a strong sense of nationalism that you don't see in traditional mainline socialism. So that is the big difference. I know that in a modern America, oh, Antifa, we're Antifa, we're only anti the fascists. Now we can call anybody who disagrees with us fascist, because hey, if you're anti the anti-fascist, you must be a fascist. Well, no, they're communist radicals who are using the name. But this is why particularly you see in Germany, where National Socialism is more than just fascism, but it had the fascist economic system, and socialists see everything through an economic lens. If you watch my various Hearts of Iron series, you know that National Socialism is more than just nationalism or socialism. It is a race is ideology, race is religion. It is much more and beyond just an economic policy. So to call Nazis just and fascists the same, they're extremely not the same. But they have very similar, not the same, but very similar economic thing. So that the communist and the National Socialist in Germany were competing for the same sort of voter, the factory worker voter. They were the ones that were competing for each of them. Those traditionalists, either, they were voting for the nationalists, not the National Socialists. They were voting for somebody else. So that's why fascism and communism and socialism would conflict so much is because they're fighting over the same group of people for support. Our new colonial administration in Africa has seen gains in light industrialized using cheap and even forced labor for industrial production. This has significantly reduced the cost of manufacture and provided us with additional equipment. Okay, good, which is probably bad colonial rule. Well, collectivist ideology, yeah, but you can go back to collectivism in the Middle Ages and stuff without the sort of socialism element going on. But, well, authoritarianism, that's everything. You know, I mean, you can have democratic authoritarianism. You know, yeah, because you can have majority tyranny. You know, so authoritarianism is just sort of a catch-all, to some degree meaningless term that is based on authority and power. I can see that right, left, center. Okay, aftermath of Black Monday. Okay, so now we have this, which helped out a little bit with political power. That's 70 days, get 100 political power. Liquidate unprofitable estates. We remove some civil factories, which we don't really have very many. Bail out the Junkers, we'll lose even more political power. So I don't want to make either of those choices right now. Experimental research, I do want to do that mostly to get to that, an extra research slot. Subsidies for Siemens, that's good, that's only 35 days. But we want to do, I think, imperial restructuring. It's going to be 7 days, but we'll get 100 political power, and there will be other different political gain elements. Yeah, we're planning on that, but I want to get out of, bailing out of the Junkers, I want to get out of this big political hole first. Then I want to bail them out. I think that's enough to hold my west wall, or whatever it's called, in Kaiserreich. Don't know what the Austrians are thinking I'm going to be threatening them with. I have no territorial ambitions against the Austrians, at least not at this time. If they decide to go against me on something, I'll fight them and take some territory. Okay, we can look at government. Authoritarianism is the idea that government is not ruled by the individual. Oh, you mean well, being a political science major, I see that as a bit more open. You're sort of saying authoritarianism is not the rights of the individual, I think is more what you're saying. But yeah, okay, diplomacy. This is currently they are at war with the Soviet republics here. So that's what they're doing. Details. I don't quite. I mean, obviously they lost this little pocket here, but that looked doomed anyways because you can't supply too much there. But I don't know whether this means who's winning or losing. Obviously, the Russians aren't crushing the Soviets at this moment. I would say in some ways authoritarianism is rule without a means of redress for the people or rule without accountability. Yeah, I'm not doubting the idea that Russia's looking like an enemy, but whether it's my emotional viewpoint, I just see Soviets as even more of that. Okay, Afghanistan and India have signed a peace deal. Their hostility. Oh, it looks like India this time got back their lost territory. Sometimes I see them do a white peace. Okay, the Arab Congress. Planned by Arab nationalists in Egypt, the Arab Congress is an event in Cairo where delegates from all Arab nations convene to discuss the situation and preservation of the Arab culture and identity. Unfortunately, this awkward and unwanted nationalism in our Arab-speaking provinces. Should keep an eye on this, and damn, it's another 25 points. Yeah, well, we're just down here. I know the Crete question is coming up, so let's move you to there. Increasing activity of the suffragette movement. Lately, there have been rise in activity of the supporters of the women's suffrage. That is, those who want to grant women the right to vote and to run for office. In these troubled times of the German Empire, it is not easy to choose the best solution. Granting them what they ask would anger the more conservative elements in our government, especially the members of the Reichstag, currently elected by universal male suffrage. On the other hand, a stern refusal, followed by reprisals, may lead to riots and more protests, especially in the more liberal states that already permitted female voting in regional assemblies. Okay, a little bit about women's suffragettes and the modern political woman, shall we say. There's recently been, well, in the last elections in the United States, Madeleine Albright, a former U.S. Secretary of State, she said that there's a special place in hell. I didn't know that she believed in heaven and hell, but there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women, or words very close to that. Recently, Michelle Obama stated that women don't, or women who voted for Trump were not voting in, or who didn't vote for Hillary, and voted for Trump or whatever, were not voting in their special interests, or in their interests for voting for Hillary. Now, neither of these two women said similar things when they betrayed Hillary Clinton before and supported Barack Obama. You see how the left is selective on this, on women's issues. And traditionally, once women got the vote, they've often been more conservative than liberal, if you will, or more right than left. Once they got the vote, this doesn't hold true everywhere in all cases, but they generally speaking are that way. If you look at women, women are in most of the world. I'm not talking the U.S. or Western Europe, but in most of the world are the purveyors of culture to the young. Who promulgates Arabic fundamentalist culture? Who represses women? Women, when they teach their children. So just because you give women the vote doesn't mean that they're all going to be left or liberal. And they're very critical about that in their viewpoint. Also, another interesting fact, I forget their names, some of the major names in the British suffragette movement joined Mosley as part of the BFU, the British Union of Fascists. So it is not necessarily a leftist proposition giving women the vote. I don't know how Kaiserreich will handle this, but cause we're supporting political power, promise to do something, do nothing. No, we're going to support this. I think we're in a deep enough place already. So once we take that as an issue off the table, yeah, okay, that's good to know. So we do this. Okay, I'm going to pause. We're going to end the episode here, but chat, don't go away. So to all you watching on YouTube, of course, you could have joined me live or see this on YouTube if the next episode is yet to be released on YouTube. You can see it on Twitch, I mean. And I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you for liking the videos. I do appreciate that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to me. And of course, post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. I love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron. Yeah, don't go anywhere on Twitch chat, please. Yeah, well, you say, leftists who think this is ridiculous. Well, yeah, I'm sure you do, but will they say it publicly? Would they go out and say that the idea that the left is the best promoter of women's rights or women's issues, the left? They jump on a few issues, abortion or whatever, that the right, I tell people I'm not an anti-abortion advocate. I'm not, that's not my thing that I advocate. But I tell people, if you believed that abortion was murder, if you believe that, then of course you're against abortion. If that's what you believe. Now, if you don't believe it's murder, then I completely understand why you might be pro-abortion. But if you believe, so those people, well, they're not standing up for women's rights or women's issues. Well, yeah, they're not, because they believe it is murder. And so you get on these few issues that some women, and if we, as I said, women mostly don't vote on the left, and where that's changing in, I think, generally speaking, in Western culture, definitely so in America, is unmarried women. And unmarried women generally, majority, vote for the left because they are looking for state sponsorship for their life choices. Meaning if they get pregnant, and they may want to get pregnant but without being married, they want the state to be able to help take care of them because they know they're not going to have a nucleus family. They're not going to have a husband who will stay working while they take care of the children, and other sorts of things. So if you're unmarried, now this often changes once the same woman gets married 5 or 10 years later. She is now no longer statistically necessarily going to vote for the left. She may still vote for the left. It doesn't. They don't all somehow magically change or anything like that. But it no longer becomes the idea of needing state support to maintain themselves, and they see the cost of the big government and the big state hurting them, so that they start realizing, well, maybe that isn't the way to go. Well, I get what you're saying, Django, but I think to a point it's the revolution that cannibalizes themselves. And that's the way revolutions go. I will use the term the American Revolution, but I really quite honestly agree with the British term for it, at least in the Wargaming magazine term for it, the American War of Independence. I really think it is a war of independence, not a revolution. Revolution had yet to get that bad sort of name, the sort of French Revolution, and revolts often had a bad name, so they didn't want to be a revolt. They didn't want to. They wanted a good sounding name, so they went revolution. But really most of the guys that ran it were um, a group of the colonial elites. Some of the colonial elites were pro-England, diehards. Others were pro-local. But they were, philosophy-wise, most of them were coming out of John Locke, which was the main sort of parliamentary viewpoint at the time. They were just looking for independence. So revolutions cannibalize themselves. And I am now seeing that, in my opinion, that the United States, I don't necessarily know enough on all the other countries, but the United States is amidst a cultural revolution. And it's happening. And if you think I'm overstating it and think I'm meaning, oh, it's peaceful sort of revolution. Well, I think largely it's peaceful, but it's not entirely peaceful, because we've already had an assassination attempt against a group of leading congressmen, and congressmen means both senators and representatives, and which Steve Scalise, who was only just yesterday or the day before or whatever it was, made it back in a walker from being shot. So, and the person was a standard middle of the road Democrat in political or economic viewpoint. He was not, well, maybe he was more of a Bernie guy, but he was not coming out a member of the Communist Party or a member of some other radical organizations. He was a Democrat who tried to assassinate a bunch of Republican congressmen. And of course, you see the Antifa movements and some of these other violent movements. We are in the midst of a revolution, a cultural revolution that is serious, and most people have not acknowledged that. Now, how would you say, okay, the establishment of the executive branch and the toleration of slavery by many of the founders? So yeah, he was a supporter of the number 2 person in the Democratic primary. Yes, he hadn't been a registered Democrat before that, but yeah. I disagree that the American Revolution betrayed itself. I don't know if you were here for my talk, Alex, about the founders and Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson, and how he couldn't get rid of his slaves. But you can go back and watch that if you didn't see that. I did cover some of that earlier on, and it is a practical sense that the nation, forming a nation, was put before freeing the slaves. Yeah, but they couldn't have gotten the support of on the independence. Okay. How do I explain this to people? There were 13 recognized, or there were 13. Okay, I'm trying to pick my words right, and if you understand the meanings of the words, hopefully you'll get this. There were 13 states that joined together, that were former colonies. 13 states joined together to fight for independence from Britain. And I use the term states not like the Americans use it as a synonym for the term providence, but a state, like as in the state of the Netherlands, the Danish state, the Austrian state of today. It is, as a situation like that. And they could not have gotten, I firmly believe this, could not have gotten the southern colonies or states support for the independence movement if the Declaration of Independence demanded, which an early draft that Jefferson, a slave owner, wrote, would free the slaves. and that they could not get the southern states, which were critical in the war, to go for independence at that time if they were to abolish slavery. Once they got their independence, there were 13 states that were sovereign. They still to this day claim sovereignty. They were sovereign. That if the northern states, if you will, demanded to get rid of slavery, the southern states, as a group or individually, would have declared their independence from the other states. So you would have had the country of Virginia, or the country of, Southern America, or whatever you want to call. I'm trying to stay away from the Confederacy. So they could not enforce that without a war. And so with the Articles of Confederation, and then to get the southern states again to translate from the Articles of Confederation to the current federal constitution in which we have, you could not do it without a war. So yes, they sacrificed their ideals for practicality. They believed that in time they would correct the solution. I think they believed at the time they could do it without war, but obviously they ended up needing a civil war to do so. And it took time. You have to remember the British Empire, in which they came at the time in 1776, was firmly a slave, not just slave holding, but a slave trading nation. It wasn't until Wilberforce and 1895 do we, oh, Demert, so good to see you again. Sometime after 1895, that you get the banning of the slave trade internationally in Britain, and that is about the most forward-thinking nation at the time, Britain, which was still holding, for holding slaves within their own colonies, but trying to stop new slaves. And you have to get through cultural consensus. If you don't get through cultural consensus, you can't. So let me read you something here. Let me read you this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, that is not, in my opinion, betraying your beliefs. That is simply putting it in your statement of belief that you got the representatives of all of your future states to sign on. It becomes enshrouded as a founding principle. And, you know, so by putting that in, I believe it sets it up there. And you say, why would you think the U.S. betrayed its, well, the U.S. government's ideals are betraying its principles by allying with the USSR? Since if you look at certain U.S. presidents, including FDR, they sort of kind of liked the USSR. They thought it went too far and was too cruel, but they thought it was okay. See, I don't think you understand how much, particularly Wilson, President Wilson, but FDR was admiring of the left. If Wilson had, or if FDR had lived past the war, he was proposing a second Bill of Rights that would have, and you can look it up, the second Bill of Rights would have like ensured everybody a job. It wasn't going to be a Stalinistic regime. I'm not in any way saying that, but it was going to be an unfree society. You can't have a socialist system and freedom. Socialism and freedom are incompatible. And so I would argue that the government is somewhat allied with the Soviet Union emotionally, but it isn't. But even if it wasn't that, it's still, they were co-belligerents as much as anything else. And also, not so much which would harm the U.S. The Soviets. What was Truman doing at the end of the war? Containing the Soviet Union. They were setting up to contain it. I'll tell you this straight up right now, the United States would never have gone to war with Nazi Germany, even if they were showing on television live executions, worldwide of the Jews, if Germany was contained and didn't start invading other countries around the world. They did not go to war to free the German people from National Socialism. They didn't go to war to free the Jews or to save the Jews. They went to war because Germany invaded other countries. Yes, Stalin invaded other countries too. We know that. He invaded Poland. He invaded Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He invaded Finland. But we couldn't do anything about that at the time because we, the world, because we were already dealing with Germany, and the U.S. was working to protect that. So I don't look at that as betraying the ideals of it. And I think, how do we put this? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, we no longer hold these truths to be self-evident. We no longer believe that in America. There is no longer a belief in freedom. Yeah, but America no longer, as a people, as a nation, I think, believes in freedom. We are now coming to that. We're now coming only to that thing, only now. We are no longer interested in freedom. We are interested in government control, and that's what we want. And that is the saddest thing, because we fought a civil war for freedom. I would agree with you that we were promoting freedom up around the world with our wars against Germany, but the world does not see freedom as a self-evident value. They just don't. So the United States promotion, often they call it democracy, but its promotion of freedom around the world is a misguided thing. And I am fine with the U.S. government supporting dictators, authoritarians. We can't change the world unless we're going to conquer and occupy the world. We just can't. And I don't think the U.S. should be in the business of conquering and occupying the world. I'm not an anti-interventionist when we need to. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, we needed to intervene. But that was because they invaded Kuwait and were getting ready to invade Saudi Arabia. I have a lot of problems with the Saudi government, but I am not trying to change the Saudi government. It is up to the Saudi people if they ever see it self-evident that freedom is good. They believe that slavery, the Saudi government, the Saudi people, it is self-evident that slavery is good because they believe in slavery to God. They're, isn't it like surrender or whatever to God, Islam is, or some of the stuff. They believe that they must do God's will. And not necessarily slavery as in one man owns another man, but slavery as in we're all slaves to God's will. And that's what they believe. And I don't think the U.S. has any place or duty or whatever to try to convince the Saudis that freedom is a good thing. If it becomes self-evident to the Saudis, great. They have, just in the last few days, have said it's self-evident now that women should be allowed to drive. There's, of course, people disagreeing with it, but the government is now saying it's self-evident that women should be allowed to drive. Now, of course, you need to be 30 years of age and older, only 18 for a man to drive. But they now believe it's self-evident. So self-evidency is the key. And when the U.S. tried to save democracy in Vietnam, it did a very bad thing. It should have just simply tried to stop communism. There is a difference. Supporting the South Vietnamese government, even though it's a corrupt dictatorship, should never have been, oh, we're here to promote freedom and democracy, and then the people look around and go, we're not free and we're not a democracy. No, we should be go, we're here to protect you from the evil communists. You know, there's a distinction and a difference there. So, you know, I think as you can tell, I am not against freedom. I am not, you know, I would like libertarianism to be a successful experiment, but it does not appear people want that. You can look at the healthcare thing. Anybody who's for government healthcare is against freedom, because government healthcare relies upon government control, meaning government taking your money to pay for healthcare that you did not choose to have. You have no choice in that. There are people that believe, including like you know, some of my educator relatives who are against homeschooling. Oh, that's just terrible. They think it's terrible. They do not believe that people have the right to keep their children out of school. And some states, like the state of Texas, very much believe in homeschooling. Governments like Germany, this modern-day Germany, it is illegal to homeschool your children. You must send your students to the government school to be indoctrinated by the government in the government philosophies. And so, you know, they don't believe in freedom in the current German government. Now, that doesn't mean that they want to reinstate National Socialism. No, there are degrees of things. They want to have the German government, though they're behaving badly, wants to believe in national consensus. That's how I would put it. And their consensus is that every child should go to school and be educated by the state. Yeah, they may, but yeah, I don't know that that's true because different states in the United States have, each state has its own education system. So within a state, it may not be very autonomous, but each state can do whatever it pleases with its own school system within the United States. Oh no, like I say, in the U.S., each governmental school system in each state is set up by the state. And there are state boards. And then each municipality has to meet the minimum requirements of that. So they were trying to get a national education system under Obama. It failed. Several major states did not sign on for it. And so you do have this. And then private school systems, private schools can do whatever they want in the U.S. Because we have religious state school or religious private schools. Mostly they're Catholic, but not all of them. There are Protestants, various flavors, Mormon private religious schools, and those students do not go to public schools. Additionally, where you have in some places religious schools after regular schools. Yes, I'm not saying they don't have freedom to go down different paths. It's just the U.S. does not have a single school system, and what the school system in California is like versus what the school system in Texas is like is very different. And so, you know, that's what I'm saying is you don't have the freedom to opt out. I don't believe you can have a purely religious school anymore in Germany. I may be wrong about that. I don't know German educational laws. If you want to find out about one of the main resistance movements to Hitler and National Socialism, look at the book Hitler's Compromises and the role of religious schools, both Protestant and Catholics, played in their resistance to nationalizing the German education system under Hitler. And how that the religious schools, as opposed to state schools. Well, I don't think you know the American school system at all. There is no job paths within the American school systems. That is just something that's not there. Welcome aboard, Farin. Thanks for following. There is, I know there are vocational schools in Germany run by the state, is my understanding of it. But there are no vocational schools run by the government in the United States. So there are no job paths set up in our educational system. All the vocational schools are private schools that are generally done after high school, and they have very, very little government interaction and no government standards, to the best of my knowledge. No state standards, or very, very minimum, and they're different than set up than in Germany in that way. It is current dogma within the American education system that all students should go to university. Yes. No, that is the dogma within the American school system, is that a successful education should continue with your indoctrination while you're going to a public university. Right now in the United States, the people who are paid the best are people who do not go to universities, but either go to schools or learn a trade on their own by becoming a plumber or electrician or some sort of trained labor, a professional laborer, not a programmer. I mean, some of those can make lots of money, but right now we are starving for trained labor, like a good car mechanic, not just someone who can, like myself, who might be able to change some parts out, but really a good mechanic or a good electrician. So, yeah, and so in the U.S. they are all pushing for to go to universities. But if you want to make good money, if you want to work at a minimum wage job, go to university. If you want to have a good paying job, go to a vocational school and learn to be a plumber or an electrician, not a drywaller or some basic, construction guy. I'm talking about somebody who like become a locksmith. Because people are getting locked out and need locksmiths to do things. If you can get a job like that in the U.S., or you can get a training like that in the U.S., you've got it made. All the foreign labor that's flooding into the U.S. is not trained in any of that. Even if they have some skills in it, they don't have English skills to complement them, so that their labor is pretty cheap. But if you are a professional laborer of a highly skilled nature, right now in America, you've got it made. You can go to any state you want and get good work. Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up. I want to thank for the new people who subscribe. I'm planning on continuing Saturday live streams, but we're only going to do these 2 episodes of Kaiserreich Here Today live. I will be doing more. I will attempt to add more scheduled live streams, but if you, of course, have followed, you will get notifications if you set it up that way when I'm on live, and you can see whatever I'm doing, whether it's something interesting or not, I don't know. So thanks everyone for showing up. I really do appreciate that. See you next time.